This story took place a few months back, during springtime. It was one of those weird periods in life where you feel completely lost. I had just finished college but didn't have any real responsibilities yet, plus way too much time on my hands. Finishing school early had seemed brilliant when I was drowning in homework and exams. But once I actually had all this empty time, I had absolutely no idea what to do with myself. My real job wouldn't start until June, and most of my friends were still stuck dealing with classes or final exams. So there I was, just drifting around, feeling trapped between two different chapters of my life. It was actually really uncomfortable and made me feel completely useless. I'm the type of person who always needs to stay busy with something meaningful. So just sitting around day after day watching time slip by was slowly driving me crazy. That's probably why I jumped at the chance when my mom asked if I could check on my Uncle Rick's beach house. It seemed like an easy favor to do. Drive down to Rehoboth Beach, make sure nothing was broken or leaking, and handle some basic upkeep to save Rick the money of hiring professional help. I should mention that I live in Pennsylvania, and Rick's place is down in Delaware, so the drive isn't too terrible. Just a little over 2 hours each way. The house is absolutely huge. The kind of place that easily fits my entire extended family every summer. All 25 of us crammed into one spot, playing endless board games and drinking way too much alcohol. Those two things are honestly the only things that really define our family gatherings. This house isn't right on the waterfront, but it's pretty close to the beach. It sits in this peaceful neighborhood surrounded by tall beach grass and curvy little roads. Fast forward to some random weekday that I honestly can't even remember now. I think it might have been a Thursday or something like that. I left pretty late in the afternoon, which looking back was probably a really dumb decision. The drive went smoothly enough though. When I finally got to the house, everything looked perfectly normal from the outside. I went inside and worked through Rick's maintenance checklist, checked all the faucets, tested the electrical breakers, and walked around the entire property. Everything seemed to be in good shape. To be completely honest, it felt really strange being there all by myself. I had never experienced that house without random board games scattered everywhere, and crowds of noisy family members drinking and laughing. The complete silence was definitely the creepiest thing about the whole situation. The place felt totally abandoned or something. I'm sure everyone has that one location, whether it's a house or restaurant, or somewhere else, that gets really loud and crazy when your whole family gathers there together. Now imagine that exact same place completely empty and silent. Pretty spooky feeling, right? Anyway, it was getting pretty late and I absolutely hate driving at night more than anything else. So I sent a text to my mom letting her know I'd just sleep there overnight and drive back home in the morning. She said that sounded like a smart plan and reminded me to send Uncle Rick a thank you message for letting me stay, which I did right away. I made myself some dinner, scrolled through my phone for a while, and then started getting ready for bed. Usually during our big family gatherings, I'd get stuck in one of the tiny rooms up on the third floor, while other relatives got to claim the nicer, bigger bedrooms. I'm not complaining about that system or anything. I'm just explaining how things normally work. Since I had the entire house to myself that night though, I figured I might as well take advantage of the situation. The master bedroom on the second floor has its own private bathroom, this massive walk-in closet, and the most comfortable bed you can imagine. The choice wasn't exactly hard to make. I knew that's exactly where I'd be sleeping that night. I climbed into bed around midnight and fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't remember what time I woke up, just that something definitely startled me awake. I was still pretty groggy, but I was absolutely certain a sound had just come from inside the closet, like something heavy had fallen over in there. Without making a single sound, I turned my head to look toward the closet. Even that tiny movement made my heart start pounding like crazy. My brain was completely awake, but my body just refused to move at all. It was like some kind of sleep paralysis, except I wasn't actually paralyzed. I could move if I really wanted to. I just didn't want to find out what might be hiding in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut tight and tried to convince myself to just go back to sleep, and I almost managed to do it. But the exact moment I started drifting back into sleep, I heard it again. A muffled thump from somewhere inside the closet. I opened my eyes just a tiny bit and tried telling myself I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't imagined anything, like I was being controlled by some invisible power. I just laid there completely frozen, with no control over my body whatsoever. Not like before though. This time it was actually real paralysis. I couldn't move even if I desperately wanted to. Until that terrifying moment, I had never truly understood what people meant when they said they were frozen with fear. I listened in complete horror as the closet door slowly started creaking open. Through my barely open eyes, I watched as this dark shadow stepped into the bedroom. It just stood there right next to the bed, completely motionless, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, and each second felt impossibly long and terrifying. Then, without making any sound, it turned around and left the room. I stayed perfectly still, barely even breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of going downstairs like I expected, they actually creaked upstairs to the third floor. My stomach felt sick. The only staircase led up there. There was no way out from the third floor. My mind was screaming at me to do something. Anything. But I was too terrified to move. I couldn't overpower a full-grown man. I had no clue if he had any weapons. The only thing I could do was wait and try not to panic. After a few painful minutes inside my own head, I finally worked up enough courage to break free from the paralysis. As quietly as possible, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The second the dispatcher answered, I whispered as softly as I could, telling them someone had broken into the house. I slipped out of bed and just as quietly turned the lock on the bedroom door. Then I waited, trying not to make any noise. Minutes dragged by painfully slowly, until flashing red and blue lights lit up the windows. I was actually pretty shocked at how fast the police got there. I ran downstairs, threw the front door open, and nearly collapsed with relief when I saw the officers. They didn't waste any time. They rushed inside, moving quickly through every room in the house. I stayed outside and waited. It didn't take them very long to search. According to the officers, the entire house was completely empty. I couldn't believe what they were telling me. I had clearly heard the footsteps go upstairs, and there was nowhere to go after that. So he had to still be in the house somewhere. There was no other logical explanation. The police kept insisting he must have slipped past me somehow, that I was too freaked out to notice him leaving. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I possibly say? The guy had just vanished into thin air. I wasn't comfortable just letting the police leave though, so I called Rick right away. Rick was not having any of it. He snapped at the officers and told them they needed to search again, and that my life could depend on them being thorough, so they agreed to do it. They searched the entire place again, much more carefully this time. Rick told me to follow the officers around and watch exactly what they were doing, so that's what I did. The officers moved step by step through every room, opening every single closet and checking under all the beds, tapping on walls like they expected to find something hidden behind them. They pulled back every shower curtain in every bathroom, double-checked all the locks on doors and windows, and that's when they discovered something important. One of the bedroom windows on the third floor, the exact room I should have been sleeping in, was completely unlocked. One officer stayed by the door while the other one went downstairs and stepped out onto the back deck. I chose to go outside with the second officer, mostly because the thought of being trapped in the house with some stranger made me feel sick. The officer shined his flashlight all around the property, but there was nothing unusual out there. Then he started scanning the roofline, and to my complete horror, his light beam swept across something absolutely terrifying. It was him. It was that same stranger who had been inside the house. He was just sitting there on the roof like it was the most normal thing in the world. He was this disgusting-looking bald man, wearing torn, dirty clothes, who looked like he hadn't seen a shower in months, maybe years. The next hour passed by in a complete blur. The officers communicated with each other through their radios and managed to get the guy down from the roof in handcuffs. The police explained that he was probably homeless and had been squatting in the house for days, possibly even longer than that. But when they asked him how he had gotten inside, how long he'd been hiding there, and why he was lurking in the closet, he wouldn't answer any of their questions. He just kept that creepy blank stare like none of it mattered to him at all. He was sitting in the back of one of their police cars shortly after that, and that was the end of it. The whole situation was so insane that it's still hard for me to wrap my head around what happened. As much as I try to figure it out, I cannot understand why that guy had been hiding in that particular closet of all places. Maybe he heard me come into the house and hid in the first spot he could think of. I still don't know how he managed to get into the house in the first place. Rick doesn't know either. It's impossible to reach the roof from ground level, so I feel like that whole explanation doesn't make much sense. The rest of my extended family has been pressuring Rick to upgrade his home security system, but he's refused every single time for reasons I can't understand. The thought that if I had been sleeping in my usual assigned bedroom, that night might have ended very differently still haunts me. My friend Mike owns a beach house down on the Jersey Shore. Calling it a beautiful property would be a huge understatement. It's absolutely magnificent, or at least to someone like me who never grew up with much money. That's exactly what it feels. Obviously, I don't know the complete history since it's not my family's house. But from what I understand, that house has been in their family for many generations. Mike's grandparents had been trying to use it as their main home for the longest time, but sadly they both passed away recently. Without anyone actually living there anymore, the house sits empty most of the time since most of Mike's extended family lives out on the West Coast and his parents are too busy with work to make good use of it. The positive side of an otherwise really sad situation is that Mike basically has free access to it whenever he wants. I'm pretty sure it was Mike's dad's plan to rent the house out to try and make some extra money. But as far as I know, those plans aren't moving very quickly. It's not exactly simple to find someone willing to rent a beach house during the off-season, so you really can't blame the guy for struggling with that. It was sometime in the middle of July when Mike called me up and asked if I wanted to come down for the weekend. He didn't have to convince me at all. I had absolutely nothing going on, and the idea of relaxing at a beach house, especially one as nice as his, was an easy yes for me. His plan was pretty simple. We'd just hang out, maybe spend some time at the beach during the day, then head over to the boardwalk at night and just enjoy the shore for what it was. It wasn't some crazy party weekend or anything like that. Just a chill break from our normal routine. And honestly, I was really looking forward to it. Mike and I live pretty close to each other, so he was going to pick me up and we'd drive down together. That Friday, I packed a duffel bag, threw it in his trunk, and the two of us hit the road. The first night was completely relaxed. We got there sometime around 6 o'clock, dropped our stuff off in the upstairs bedrooms, and got settled in. The house has that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, like a mixture of salt air and old wood. Not in a bad way though, more like it has real history. You could tell it had seen decades and decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick dinner from a sub shop nearby, we decided to walk along the beach for a while just to enjoy the evening. Mike had brought a couple fishing rods with him, so we figured we'd try our luck catching something for a while. It wasn't really about actually catching any fish though, it was more about just being out there enjoying ourselves. At one point we ran into a pair of girls around our. They were walking barefoot along the water, and Mike being Mike started talking to them right away. They were from the local area, or at least somewhat local, and it turned into one of those casual, slightly flirty conversations that happen naturally when you're young and hanging out at the beach at night. We got their phone numbers, and they continued their walk while we went back to fish. There were still plenty of people around since it was peak tourist season, but Mike knew all the quiet spots, private beach access points, hidden paths through the sand dunes, little areas between houses where the lights didn't. We ended up finding this nice stretch of beach, all to ourselves, where the only sounds were the waves and the wind. It was the kind of night that made you forget about real life for a while. The next morning, we woke up around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already getting warm outside by then, but there was a nice breeze coming off the ocean that made it comfortable. We weren't doing anything too intense, just a couple miles to get our blood flowing. Mike's a pretty active guy, and I've been trying to stay in decent shape, so it felt good to move around after a night of just lounging. The rest of that day kinda slipped by without us really noticing. Later that evening, Mike suggested hitting a few bars in Seaside, but we were both pretty tired. Even though the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in long lines and yelling over loud music didn't really match how our bodies felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up going to bed pretty early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to this shrill, piercing beeping sound. At first I thought it was part of some dream I was having, but after a second or two of lying there in the darkness, I realized it was definitely real. It sounded exactly like a smoke detector, one of those sharp, high-pitched alarms that cuts straight through your skull and wakes you up instantly. I threw myself out of bed and started looking around my room, trying to figure out where the beeping was coming from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my bedroom or anywhere else on the second floor. After listening more carefully for a few seconds, I got the feeling that it was actually coming from somewhere above me.
Without even thinking about it, I yanked my bedroom door open and made a straight line for Mike's room. With both hands, I shook him awake and told him he needed to follow me right now. He immediately understood something was wrong and hurried after me, not even bothering to put a shirt on like our lives depended on it. The two of us ran up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd find up there. The third floor was mostly dark, except for a little bit of moonlight coming in through the window at the end of the hallway. We flipped on all the lights and started scanning the area, still expecting to see or smell something burning, but there was absolutely nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of any fire at all. Actually, it was completely baffling. Eventually, after some painfully annoying minutes of searching for whatever was making that awful noise, I found something strange. In one of the bedrooms, tucked carefully under a pillow, was this small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to look at it more closely myself, mostly because I was so confused. It was about the size of a walkie-talkie, completely black, except for a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen of any kind, just smooth black plastic, that blinking light, and what looked like a single switch on the side. I flipped the switch off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike walked into the room at exactly the same time. His eyes went from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything at first. We made eye contact, and I could tell he was just as confused and just as scared as I was. After a few more seconds of complete silence, he asked me if I had ever seen that black thing before. I told him no and asked him the same question, and he also said no. For the next hour, we tried figuring out what that device was, how it had gotten there, and what had made it go off. But no answer we came up with made any sense. Mike swore that none of his family members had been in that house in ages, and I believed him completely. I mean, why would he lie about something like that? Plus, who would put that thing in their own home? You might think it was for safety reasons, or maybe a replacement for a broken upstairs smoke detector. But again, there was no fire anywhere, so it hadn't actually prevented any emergencies. And then there was the question of how it had been triggered in the first place. That was the scariest part of the whole situation. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark, when I had this crazy thought. I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me until that moment. I pulled out the device, and very quickly, flipped the switch on, and then off again. And you guessed it, the shrill beeping started up again, and stopped as soon as I flipped it off. Both of us froze, and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The realization hit us both at exactly the same time. The only way to operate that device was by hand. Someone else was definitely in the house with us. We didn't waste a single second. Mike called the police while I locked his bedroom door, barricading it as well as I could. We waited for what felt like forever, and finally the officers showed up. We quickly made our way downstairs to meet them at the front door. After giving them a very quick description of what was happening, they did a complete sweep of the entire house, while we waited outside by the front door like they told us. When they finally came back downstairs, what they told us was absolutely horrifying. Apparently every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the tiny bathroom windows. And it wasn't just, all the beds had been flipped over, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was scattered on the floor. The room where I had found the device looked completely destroyed. Even though it had been perfectly neat and tidy when we searched up there, I felt like I was losing my mind, and so did Mike. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept what we were seeing. The officers didn't find much else though. No one hiding anywhere, no fingerprints, no weapon. After another 20 minutes or so, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secure from now on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left us there. Mike and I didn't feel safe staying in that house after someone, probably crazy or on drugs, had messed with us in such an unexplainable way. But we really had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there for the rest of the night, and leave early in the morning, and that's exactly what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house that night must have left because nothing else happened for the rest of the night. There are still parts of that night I can't explain at all, and I can only imagine what Mike must be feeling. For all we know, whoever had been in that house that night might never have actually left. This story happened quite a while ago, when I was 22 years old. Enough time has passed that I feel safe talking about it now. I was fresh out of college, with a good job, and very few expenses, since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Just imagine that, building up serious savings, without having to worry about food or rent, and all the while having complete access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in complete bliss. Believe me, I knew exactly how lucky I was to have parents who let me stay at home rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted. But not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened less than 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink crazy amounts of alcohol. I don't spend every bit of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't let men control my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture completely disgusts me. Because of all that, my life follows a pretty steady routine. Wake up, get my caffeine fix, go to work, hit the gym, read some of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, short road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other two friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been there before, but from the way Lindsay described it, the place sounded like an absolute dream. Quiet, tucked away from all the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water.
To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family has serious money. I think both her parents were brain surgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be incredible, and I was nowhere close to disappointed. When I first saw it, I was completely stunned. Look, I'm no expert on architecture, but I know modern style when I see it. And Lindsay's house must have been ultra modern, because it looked more like some kind of secret military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it. Believe me, I took plenty. But out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be really inappropriate, even if what I'm about to tell you hadn't happened. The four of us unloaded our bags and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to have our own space. But what would be the fun in that? Instead, the four of us decided to stay in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own private bathroom. We'd been staying there for 3 nights, which in my opinion is the perfect amount of time to spend living together with anyone other than your family. I tend to get irritated pretty easily, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to annoy me without much effort. Not that any of my friends are like that, but you know how it goes. I know I already told you about my relatively boring lifestyle, but if there was ever a time to drink and let loose, it was that weekend with my friends. So I definitely planned on relaxing my standards a little more than I normally would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, looking up at the stars. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker, when we noticed something strange in the distance. It was this faint flickering light coming from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us got quiet and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of mesmerizing, as creepy as it was. After a while it became obvious that the light was swinging back and forth like someone walking with a handheld flashlight. And soon after that, we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving in any strange way, but strolling at a normal, relaxed pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which made all of us relax a little bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers, or maybe even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point one of them yelled out, "Hi," in a really friendly voice. It was definitely a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back and we made some casual small talk, while they walked over to us. As they got closer, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were really into. Especially Thea. She gets a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows exactly how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything shocking. To be fair though, she is absolutely gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not be interested in her. The guys sat down with their beers, and all 7 of us continued drinking together. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't being overly flirty, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ended up inviting us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards just going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to keep hanging out with the boys. Especially Thea, of course. I decided not to ruin everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go ahead without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had absolutely no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back toward Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, probably toward wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was really confusing since she should have either been back home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped, and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being thrown in my face. I've never felt such intense fear and adrenaline in my entire life. I didn't waste a single second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and ran downstairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she told me that she already had called them. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through what to do. With her help, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in just a few minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car they were in and told me what direction it had gone, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single other car on the road, and I was driving at a dangerously high speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over by police. After a few minutes of driving, I spotted a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police myself, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance, so I wouldn't alert them to what was happening. So that's exactly what I did. After what felt like forever, I saw cop lights up ahead. The car in front of me didn't try to run from the police. I can only guess that they thought it was just some unrelated traffic stop. I pulled over and watched everything happen. It was complete chaos. The officers forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in handcuffs and walked them back to one of the police cars. Then one of the officers went to the trunk of the car and opened it up to reveal both Thea and Sabrina tied up, and from what I could see pretty badly beaten up. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to hearing what happened from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me sharing this story, by the way. We're still in close contact, so obviously I asked them first, but none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for totally understandable reasons. To keep things relatively short, after I went to bed, they all kept drinking together. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least somewhat responsible given that it was her family's house we were staying at. At some point the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed together. So the 4 of them split off while Lindsay told the 3rd guy she was going home. He got really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was just because he wanted to hook up with her. She told him she would have been interested, but had to watch her family's house, and he got angry. They argued for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy to do. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of their car before driving off. She called the police, then called me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers and they worked incredibly hard to do 2 things. Keep the whole incident as far away from the public as possible, and make sure those guys got the maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both goals. It turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random elderly couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus all the other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a very long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly make up for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this whole experience traumatized me for years. I couldn't handle beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed or how safe the situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little while, but luckily that's changed since then. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina.
Part of me thinks that not remembering anything might actually be a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that if I hadn't gone home early, I might not have been able to get to Lindsay's car in time. And if it hadn't been for that, the police might never have found those guys' car.